today that are hopefully really helpful for you guys. The first is what sort of talent you want. The second is how to find it, particularly for you that will be moving from Australia to the States, how you find it in the States. Once you've got it, how you actually keep that talent and cultivate it. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, what you should do when things go wrong, when you find that there's not a fit or something isn't working out very well. So we're going to cover those topics in about half an hour. Let's make this interactive. If you have questions for the panellists as we go through, just shout them out, and we'll keep this nice and lively. So let's start with the sort of talent that you want. And Andrew, we'll start with you. Thinking back to the early days when you were just starting up, what's the right sort of core team, and who should and shouldn't you hire first?
So we did engineering in Australia, sort of built our first version of product, came over here. So the first people we hired were in sales and business development. I think that's obviously makes sense if you're moving into the US. I think probably the mistake we made was, you can hire, there's just a huge range of talent, and we were bootstrapping. So I think at various points we've kind of had to upgrade the team as we've gone through. In an ideal world, you come in here with enough capital or aim very high and give equity and all those sorts of things, and hire, A players who have really in-depth industry knowledge, good connections and so forth. And I think as Australians, we are typically generalists. We grow up in small organisations where we're called on to do a whole bunch of different things. Australians' culture isn't really about individualism. So I think in America you've got this, competitive, individualistic, and very large economy that you have a lot more specialists here. So if you're in a retail business, hire somebody with 10, 15 years experience selling to, grocery stores. If you've got a grocery product that you want to get in at Whole Foods, hire somebody who knows already, who plays golf with the purchasing manager at Whole Foods. That level of specialisation exists. You can hire it, and as Australians, I don't think we A, appreciate that specialisation exists, and B, that we can get it, and we can. So.
Great, that's great advice. Mick, so you have a co-founder, right, at Pollenizer. What sort of person makes a great co-founder? Assuming that he's great.
He is.
Good.
Phil and I have been married for 10 years, so we work back at Kazaa, and we got sued by $1 trillion worth of companies, so we've been through the fire together. So I think really importantly, I get a lot of support at the right time, and I get my ass kicked at the right time. A lot of really high accountability, a lot of trust, and I just absolutely know when he has the ball, he's really got the ball. We come together at the right times. We get really drunk once a month. We make sure we paint the vision really brightly with each other, and we just really regularly check in. The other thing for Phil and I, we both check in on our whole lives. And that's one thing I think is tougher to share with the full team. Like, we can be really open about our ambitions right now, our energy levels right now, how our other wives are looking at the business right now, because they come along the journey with you and with your families. But the main thing I know is that there's a supportive accountability. It is really aggressive. We really push each other and raise the bar constantly. But it's not, he's not going to fire me or throw me out. I want to be better because I know he's working his ass off as well.
Great. That sounds like a good relationship. Like a proper marriage, actually. Okay, so Ilya, so we've heard a little bit about how you want your co-founder to be someone that you can have a strong relationship with, and also Andrew talked a little bit about the importance of finding people with specialised skills. What other sort of advice would you have for folks in terms of backgrounds you should look for when you're hiring a team? How can you ensure that they're good? Should you be looking for startup people versus corporate, for sort of specific skills versus general athletes? How should you think about the backgrounds?
Yeah, well, I think you need to understand what stage you are in the business, what industry focus you have, whether you're an enterprise business or consumer. Can't hear me?
Yeah, microphones aren't working.
Yeah, I don't think it's Mark's working.
Okay, you need to work out, first decide what stage you are as a business and what market you're facing, because an enterprise sales guy is a different guy from a consumer web guy focusing on SEM marketing. And really in a startup though, there's only two classes of people that you need to hire or have a co-founder in. And it's people that can sell and people that can build product. If they fall outside of that, their overhead, and they're not really contributing to the success of the startup in the short term. So your startup's going to die in 6 months. What's going to make it succeed past that 6 months? It's people that are selling a product, building a product, and that's how you need to sort of prioritise all the types of hires. In terms of people with their backgrounds, like having come from a corporate background, I spent about 4 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then I spent 2 years working at a startup. And I was very actively mentored by the CEO to sort of unlearn what I'd learned at PwC, because the skills that make you successful in a big corporate environment are the same skills that kill a startup. And an example of that would be analytical skills. If you work in professional services or banking, you're taught and trained to think very analytically, because you're defending a revenue stream and you're trying to understand it. In a startup, you're trying to create a revenue stream, and by analysing things, you're actually dissecting things so much that you're killing any creative ideas that can sort of build the revenue streams. When you're building a startup, you're always iterating, and you're always sort of, it's like sticking spaghetti onto the wall and onto the ceiling, and if it sticks, you keep sticking the same type. That's what you need to be doing, always sort of evolving what you're doing, and that's why you need those complementary skills rather than analytical skills. So I think when you're going to take someone that's had a corporate background, I've seen this, I've had personal experience on the other end where I was managed by someone who had a corporate background, and he killed the startup, and he actually led me to leaving the startup, and he ended up getting fired because of it. And the problem with him was that he was a lot older, and he wasn't willing to unlearn those skills. A younger person, actually, like how I was about 25 when I moved here, I didn't have the arrogance to think, oh, I've already been 20 years into my career, I'm not going to unlearn these skills that I've learned. And so that's something else I'll probably be looking out for, but definitely you need to be careful with people's previous backgrounds because of the biases they bring with them.
I think just to add to that, if a corporate person says they've worked in small teams, it's not the same. It's not the same as having no money, and have no resources and no brand and no massive printing staff and no design team. The ability to gouge a business out of the earth is what you need. Some people can do it, but I think it's I haven't had any success with corporates going into startups when it's less than 5 people. So.
Great. So, Mick, just a follow-up question for you as well. So, let's assume we're taking Elia's advice, and you're just hiring people that are sort of doing product and sales. As a CEO and founder, how do you get the advice that you need? How do you build up an advisory board or a set of advisors and get the most out of them?
It's a tough one. I mean, I always say aim as absolutely high as you can. A lot of times people go to their friends, they go to who they have access to. But I think I agree there's some amazing specialist people who can really help you. And I think it goes back a little bit again to accountability. You want someone who can call your bluff. One advantage of an advisor is they're not in the trenches with you every day, so they can beat you over the head if you're losing focus or if you're not getting the job done. I think it's really important that they have a vested interest. Don't just get their name on a presentation. I've seen it so many times. Like, here's our list of advisors, and unless they've either put money in or are spending a day a week with you, then they're just a name on a presentation. I like it for advisors. I like a balance of someone who's going to stretch us in new areas and someone who's really comfortable in terms of the core of what we're doing. So that's a good thing about advisors. You don't have that luxury, as Elliot said, in your actual team to have people to try new things, but in your advisor group you can have people that push you in different areas. For advisory people as well as team, it's much more about character than resume. It's so much more about the fit and values fit than like we had an interview for WooBoard yesterday, and the guy said, "Do you want to see my resume?" And I didn't care at all. It was just I'd rather spend an hour with him and understand what's important to him, what drives him, how he likes to work, what inspires him. Because at 3 o'clock in the morning, it doesn't matter if 10 years ago he had a job doing what doesn't matter. It's the character of the person that's much more important.
Although we would give you advice not to lie on your resume. Okay, so now you all know the sort of talent that you want. So let's move on to how you actually find it, right? That's kind of the most important bit. So Andrew, let's start with you. So you obviously started at Epox in Australia and then moved out in 2002, is that right?
Yeah.
Roundabouts?
Yep.
Roundabouts. And you had to build up a local team, right? So tell us a little bit about how you found talent in the Valley, having moved across from Australia.
I guess the two sources for us have been referrals and just online advertising. I think surprisingly you can put an ad for very senior positions, whether it be vice presidents or what have you, on LinkedIn and get some phenomenal resumes. another company I was advising, we actually even advertised for a CEO on LinkedIn, and got some amazing people. They would just blow your socks off. People who have sold companies and gone public or what have you, who just like, oh, that's interesting, I'll inquire, and then that's just the start of the conversation. From there you can pitch them and so forth. But yeah, we've had a lot of success with just online advertising and then working networks, your advisors who might be interested in this. Every opportunity is obviously an opportunity for recruitment, but do both, put it out there, and these days I think it kind of works together. You put it on LinkedIn, you send it out to everybody you know saying, hey, I'm recruiting, start evangelizing the job description. But don't be shy about it. I mean, explain the opportunity. There's a lot of people who are willing to join small companies. I think Australians sometimes have inferiority complex, like we're a small business or we're not a real business unless we have a real office and things like that. It's like that doesn't matter to Americans. They're very comfortable working in small, going to startups. In fact, they love the concept. So don't be shy of who you are. I think, particularly in Valley, it's almost a badge of honor of working for a two-person company. I get a little bit of the reverse of that. Oh, you're a 10 years old, 40-person company. How boring, next person to talk to, right? So I get a little bit of reverse bias. But so embrace that, the American enthusiasm for startups, and don't be shy about setting high goals for who you can recruit, because you can surprise yourself. There can be people who are just bored.
Are all Australians crazy?
That's the perception,
Okay.
yeah.
It is, by the way. So you were talking a little bit about networks. Let's spend a moment more on that with you, Ilya. So you have developed a great network over here. Can you tell the guys a little bit about how you've done that and how it's helped with talent recruitment?
So I've been here now nearly 3 years and I didn't know anyone. I hate networking events. I hate doing meetings. But the way I built my network actually is through two rules, and I guess the fact that I've built it up in the last 3 years kind of proves that. And that is I prefer to collaborate with people, work with them on projects. The way I got to America was because I worked with a guy on a thing called the Data Portability Project, which I helped create. Didn't know who he was other than a smart guy, and he kind of mentored me, convinced me to move to America, and introduced me to a few guys, including Naval Ravikant, who's behind AngelList, and some of you might have heard. And he in turn convinced me to move to America and mentored me and became a good friend. And then he in turn introduced my current boss, George Zachary, who's a partner at Charles River Ventures and was the first investor in Twitter and a bunch of other companies like that. And between Naval and George, they have phenomenal networks. Any person Naval introduces me to, I know is quality. I mean, George himself, like the job he gave me, I had a job to manage 35 startups within the CRV portfolio, and they themselves are some of the top startups in Silicon Valley. And so just through building strong relationships with a few key people, they've kind of filtered that network and introduced me to their broader network. I guess that's kind of the main way to collaborate. I had another way, but let's leave it at that then.
And how's that helped with talent recruitment?
In terms of talent, I guess I've also built my network through Startup Bus. So 500 people have gone through that. A lot of them are engineers, and again, it's helped in the sense that by collaborating with people, you see what they're capable of. They know what your personality is like. They see you at your worst, and they know how you are as a real person. And when it comes to recruiting, you got to think of it more as like a relationship-based approach, where you're not just negotiating on terms, but on the actual compatibility as a personality. I think recruiting talent is a really hard thing to do, and being able to sell people on your vision and people believing in you is a big part of how you're able to convince people to work with you and for you. Again, when it comes to talent, I think you can use online job ads, and right now is a great time in the economy because of the recession in America. And there's a lot of great people, especially people outside of San Francisco, who are just dying to get jobs and are willing to get paid substandard salaries. But you'll be surprised that I really think the best way, though, the best type of people where you're taking the least amount of risk in hiring people is when you've already got some data points based on how you've performed on previous projects that you worked with them on.
So let's spend a minute just on something you touched on briefly there, which is the availability of talent. I know I've been trying to recruit in mobile at PayPal, and it's an absolute nightmare. You know, everyone we hire gets like 50 different offers, particularly engineers and designing talent. So while there is a downturn in the economy, I think there are specific skills, particularly in the tech and design field, that are very hard to hire in, at least in San Francisco. So Mick, you should have a pretty good pulse on the market through your work at Pollenizer. What do you think the market's like at the moment in the Valley and elsewhere, and what are some of the expectations from people here in terms of salary, risk, equity, and so forth?
I can't comment too much on the engineering side, other than a few of the companies we work with have lost engineering talent due to just freakishly large offers from Facebook, Google, Twitter. That's really, really difficult. The funny is, in Australia, there's just a lack of, there's not a large supply of amazing engineering talent. And here there's a large supply, but the demand is far outweighing. And also just the changing structure of building startups now is that engineers are more likely to be able to go out and start a startup themselves. So their options are just enormous. I think a key thing around that is actually selling a vision, though, because if they wanted a boring cubicle job that paid really well, there's a lot of those. But what a lot of them have the opportunity to do is to choose a journey, to choose an adventure to go on, and that again is around people. On the flip side, on the sales and marketing and business development side, we put up a job ad up for a VP of Biz Dev for WooBoard and had on LinkedIn, $295 ad, 112 applicants. Some of them were just amazing, like had just basically done the job for 12 years. One guy's just sold his third startup, was just looking for a new adventure, like the idea. So LinkedIn was fantastic for that side of things. So,
sorry, I just want to make a comment on LinkedIn, was that the more senior the position, the more applications you're going to get and the more amazing they are. We have a struggle if we advertise just for a sales rep, we might get 4 applicants sometimes.
Right.
Advertise for a VP, you'll get 120 and they'll be unbelievable. So
yeah, that's right. I think one thing about it was you do get a lot of just click applies. And what we had an auto reply back to them, which was just, wow, what is it about WooBoard you love so much? Half people didn't reply back, which obviously they didn't really care, but the other half, they were forced to tell me why they loved WooBoard. So it lifted our trial customers as well, which was really nice. So availability of biz dev and marketing, I think, is really strong at the moment. Engineering design is really, really tough, but I think you can get them. The difference in Australia, Guy was talking before about stock options. Australia structure is just awful for stock options. It's just almost impossible. But if you flip up to a C Corp Delaware, then you can actually then implement a better stock options program. So it's certainly one of the advantages of doing that. So with some stock options, a dream, some good people to work with, a new adventure, I think you still can get engineering talent.
So spending a moment on stock options, because this always comes up as a big topic as you're looking to hire. What are some of the expectations? You guys can all answer this in terms of stock options, risk, salary, particularly when you're hiring, your first CTO or VP of Eng or Chief Sales Officer. How are people expecting that to shape up in the Valley?
There's a really great study done by a HBS professor, Neil Wasserman, I think is his name. And anyway, it's at compstudy.com, and it's a lot of the VC-backed companies will submit all their salary survey data there once a year. I do it, I get access. Includes equity data, includes whether founder, non-founder status, head of development, includes the size of the company, the industry, and it's all like software, like health sciences and so forth. Phenomenal salary survey data for senior people, not so much sort of head of development or it's for VP on up.
What was the website again?
CompStudy, compstudy.com. Anyway, if you submit the data, you get free access, and it's really worthwhile. And you can slice and dice region, California versus elsewhere, and so forth. It's really good, and there are rules of thumb that you can also get from Quora or what have you, which will reflect that. Ranges anywhere from 0.25% for an engineer up to 5% for a CEO, depending on what stage you're at.
And I think that would be sort of the general advice to you guys is, there are standards and expectations in the market around this. So if you don't know, look for resources like that, or just talk to people in the industry, talk to VCs or other people doing startups to get a base idea, and that will help you go. And the other point that I would just add is, with sales and marketing and BD, there's lots of good available talent here. What we're finding in sort of, at least at bigger companies in the Valley, is a lot of people are outsourcing engineering and design to places other than Silicon Valley. So, we have engineering teams in Austin, in Boston, in Chicago, in a bunch of different places, and that's starting to happen more and more, I think, because it's such a scarce and expensive resource in the Valley that if you can find great talent elsewhere in America or even back in Australia, that's becoming a pretty common thing to do. You guys have seen that too. Okay, so now you know what talent you want, you've found it. As we said, it's kind of a hot talent market, and you want to sort of build a good company. So what do you do to keep people and to develop them as well, so that you get the most out of the talent that you've now hired?
One quick point to start is even if you find A-class people, don't abdicate responsibility. Don't expect just because they've done it 5 times before that you can just put them in a role, leave them in a room for 3 months, come back and go, wow, they've just made an amazing product. Or because alignment of values is great, but you've got to keep doing it. Alignment of vision is almost a daily task. And especially a lot of developers think I'm scared of hell of selling, so I'll just hire a salesperson to do it for me. Typically, unless you've sold it, they won't. It's hard to find people who actually work out how to sell your product. It can be a very different thing. So even if they're A-class, think about training and developing them, spend time with them. Just really don't abdicate responsibility for that.
I think honestly, as an executive here in the US, hiring is something that you work on probably your whole career. I rank myself a 3 out of 10, and I realised I was a 0 out of 10 when I got here. And I've got a long way to go, but I'm starting to get better. There's just a quick tip. There's a process called top grading that a lot of the private equity firms use. You can read top grading for sales, top grading for whatever, top grading for CEOs if you want to go down that direction. The bubblegum version, that's called Who, which is written by the same group of people. These are consultants that do hiring for private equity firms. So I'd use that. Get used to doing 8-hour interviews of people. You really need to get underneath them. Top grading takes the approach of, so tell us about high school. What were the subjects that interest you? And then go from high school onwards instead of reverse backwards. So you really get a sense for this person's life story. I actually went through this process with somebody. He got up at the end and he said, "This was fantastic," and I realised I'm not the right person for this job. And he walked out. But he was just like, he felt like he'd been on Oprah or something. So I would recommend really understand somebody's life story. Start at high school and go on forward. At least the last 10 years of career history. Get underneath it. Ask all the questions. Resume doesn't mean anything. Character, personality does, and you're going to get a sense from that if you put that level of effort into it. So.
But in terms of keeping people, I think one thing I've learned is giving people creative freedom and control, a sense of ownership. When you're an employer and a boss, you tend to bad bosses give accountability to people, but they don't give them the freedom to have the responsibility to make decisions. So if you're going to give accountability to people, make sure you also match it with responsibility, and that means you give them that creative control to think like they are their own boss. Especially the best types of people to hire in a startup are entrepreneurs themselves. They also are the hardest people to manage, and the only way to do that is by knowing that they're going to leave eventually. They're probably going to start their own thing, and helping them understand that you're helping them contribute to their future vision in life. And you've got a lease on them, which I think is the other major point with all employees. You don't own any resource or talent. You simply have a lease and access to it. And once you get them in the door, let's just assume that they are high quality. You need to spend the rest of your job trying to retain them. And you need to always be paranoid that you're going to be losing them, and always be thinking about ways of trying to keep them motivated. So creative control is something I've learned, and how I manage to motivate 50 people to work for me for free on Startup Bus. But I think there's other ways that all contribute to the fact that you're always listening to what really drives and motivates that individual, and always building solutions around that. And it doesn't mean more salary. It might mean buying them a screen that's 30 inches, or giving them a day off a week to do whatever they want, something like that.
And another quick suggestion that Tristan suggested to me is, a lot of people say, I worked at Google. And you're like, well, you wrote the entire search engine. What specifically did you do? And you drill down on an individual task, and you get to really understand how people deal with just individual situations. The other question I like to ask is, fantastic, let's pretend you got the job. Monday morning, 6 a.m. in the morning, you get started. What's the first thing you do? And it's always an indication for me about how they prioritise. I'd certainly like to think about that.
Great, so now we know how to hire people perfectly, but let's just assume for one wild moment that you get it wrong. I'm sorry, there's a question at the back, yeah.
Do you have any comments with respect to productivity in the Bay Area, given the proliferation of people working at sort of free love institutions like Google and Apple and places like that?
There's a good article in the recent Harvard Business Review about product management and about leaving room for not going to full capacity. I think it goes to the same question: is if you absolutely book in people to full capacity, that they won't ever have that room to think about new things or add new value, and that's so crucial in the early stages of a new startup. You're just, I was going to say, rarely executing the plan. You're actually never executing the plan because it changes every day. So you've got to leave some capacity in there, I think. So I think that's the idea behind the hippie free love 20% time. It's normally like 20% on top of 160% is how they talk about it. But some time at least to have that freedom, I think is important.
Yeah, and we book our engineers to about 70 or 80% capacity, and that gives them time to work on stuff they really care about. And sometimes that's stuff that will never hit your product roadmap, right? Like it might be just fixing some code or fixing some bugs. But when you're trying to get new products out and do all that kind of stuff, you might not really care about. But if you're a really good technical person, a really good engineer, you take pride in your work, you want that time. So thinking about capacity in that, I think, is really important. So very quickly, last question. You've made a hiring mistake. It might be obvious within the first hour. What do you do about it? Like, what do you do when things go wrong?
Well, in the US, it's much more culturally to say you're fired.
Yeah.
You know,
That's true.
It is. You know, you can just say it. You're fired. Sorry.
There's not as much stigma in America about being fired.
And the employment's at will.
The law allows it. The culture allows it. You can say it if you want to in the first hour. That would be if in the first hour you realise a mistake, and I have done that once. The guy stayed in a hotel and thought there were bed bugs, and it was really weird. Anyway, so you make a mistake. Probably the other way to do it is, I think, for me, is if I start feeling myself getting frustrated, it's like, and I start being maybe a little passive aggressive towards an employee. It's like, why am I frustrated? Spend a bit of time analysing it, think about their personality and say, oh, they're a bit of a control freak. And then I'll try and go through the education process of making them aware that they're a control freak. And then that'll be the thing we work on every week. And you know what? If they can't fix it, you know, it's pretty obvious. And then once you tune into what the problem is, you can actually pick up on the individual behaviours, and you can write them emails immediately afterwards and say, hey, X, you know, in this meeting you demonstrated this behaviour. And then, you know, if you've done that for 2 or 3 months, you can let somebody go with a clear conscience that it's them, not you. You know?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. You need to understand sometimes that a lot of conflict happens through communication styles. Some people are big picture thinking, other people are very detail orientated, and you can get frustrated with an employee just because they have a different way of thinking, and you need to understand, is that really just a clash with yourself and your own personality? And that's actually a good thing. You need people around you that are different. But when you actually know it's an employee that isn't suited for you, and that's, I mean, the simple way to measure that is just their productivity. They just don't do any work. They're doing hours work a day, real work a day. I think there's 2 approaches, I think, and I've definitely tried this. The one is that you just got to fire people immediately because they're detrimental to the rest of the team, especially the smaller the team that has a bigger impact on everyone else. People get resentments. That person might have an attitude problem that leaks onto other people, and they're just a bad egg that you need to get rid of as soon as possible. But a lot of times you find people are ineffective over a longer time. So what I've seen is people that are really good in the first year, in the second year, they're actually really bad. People that just sort of burn out themselves, or they just aren't as motivated anymore. And they're great employees, but now it's time for them to move on. And the best thing to do there is to phase them out. Sort of start segmenting them into different responsibilities where they start getting isolated, and they eventually realise themselves they've got to sort of move on themselves, and it becomes like a mutual thing.
And a quick one to add to Elliott's comment before about if you've worked with someone before, it's easier to know to hire them. So find a way in the interview process to actually work with them. And if they're engineers, don't just do a code review. Do something that's actually part of the life of a startup, which is sit down and talk about a feature or talk about a customer experience, or do something really quite work-related I like to say, well, yeah, I'd love to get your feedback. Let's just workshop this business, or how would you go and attack it? And you really understand how they deal with problems, how they communicate. If they grab the whiteboard marker off you and tell you to sit down and shut up, then it's like, okay, the type of person at least you're going to work with. So instead of just being Q&A back and forth in the interview process, find a way to do some work together.
Okay, was there a question?
Yeah, I'm just going to add a little experience to this. As the company leaders, what generally happens is that you're growing really, really fast. It is not apparent to you that the person who joined your company with a certain title and probably did that job well for the first couple of years or first year was perfectly suitable to that job at that size of business. If you step back from that position today, for someone whose performance is not satisfactory, you step back and you look at that job description today, it is generally profoundly different from the position that you hired for and the person turned out to be satisfactory for. You're in the middle of the milieu, and so as you're growing and expanding, you just think everybody around you is growing and expanding. It's just not true. They can still be good employees, but you have to redefine that skill set and see that you've actually would hire them for a different job. And if that's true in your business at that time, fine. Otherwise, it's going to end up in a bad place, because what one of the other speakers said, you're expected to know everything. Your employees will be asking, why the hell doesn't the boss know that this person is a jerk? They will be way earlier than you are figuring out that this person needs to leave, and you will be surprising nobody except with the time period it takes you to realize that person needs to leave. But jobs grow so fast in startups, responsibilities change so fast, that you're continuously challenged with phasing people out because they no longer have the skill sets that are suitable to exactly the same title.
Great, so unfortunately we're out of time. I know we could all speak about talent for hours, but please join me in thanking the panelists. I think they were really fabulous.